I'm Chris Page and I'm here with Angelo Gifford, co-owner of SPC, the Street Photographers Community. And we're just going to take some time to look at Angelo's photos and really celebrate some of his better shots and look at what makes a street photographer tick as such. So, hello, Angelo.
Hello, Chris.
You're well?
I'm very well. How are you?
All good, all good. We'll skip straight to the photos because that is what people are here to see. First image I've chosen is this image, and I think you called it laser eyes because you've managed to get the play of light right on these guys' eyes. The image is not a classically what you might class as a perfect image. It's blurred, it's grainy, but it still has, I think, what makes a street photo an effective street photo is in that it has a story and it has a feeling. Can you just talk us through this image a little bit?
Yes, it was taken one evening earlier in the year, I think in January, and I was walking through the Soho area of London, and there they have, and I partly walk around that area because there's something about the premises and the shops where they often have people working in the windows, and those windows get very steamed up. And so one of the types of shot that I do quite like working with is scenes of condensation. You know, this in a way was one of those scenes. When you get a little bit of blurriness, I kind of find that blurriness, you know, as a result of the condensation and the steam, as you see here, I tend to find it kind of makes you work a little harder to see what's there. It adds a little bit of mystery, perhaps, and that's partly what attracts me to these scenes. And I took about 4 or 5 shots of this guy. He was sort of moving around quite actively, and it just so happened that this shot he aligned with a little reflection in the window, which gave him these laser-like eyes.
Now, this next photo, I think this is a couple of years old now. And again, it's what isn't important is not the sharpness, it's not the focus, it's all slightly blurred, but you get this wonderful dispersed light and the contrasting colors of the blue and the reddy pink boots. And I think this is a photo. These color schemes come up again and again in your photos, and I've always looked at you as a photographer who had a very good eye for light, but I don't think until I spent an evening studying your photos where I started to notice how you bring in the color within the light.
I've always quite liked to work in color rather than black and white. Here I was just struck by the light that had shone on this woman's boots, which were very bright red, and they really picked them out in the scene, almost to the extent that the exposure has completely removed her body, and so you've got this sort of odd kind of ghostly boots walking along a footpath, and that sort of scene of blue lights, which is part of the display, is kind of the footpath ahead in the distance.
So I know you went through a period of time where you were looking a lot at shapes and lines, and I think this is something that's becoming more and more a feature of your photography. When I see a photo, I'll quite often know it's yours before I see your name there, because of the play between the lines in a photo and the lights. And so why I picked this photo to look at was, not only have you got this beautiful light on the tarmac, but it's the photo generally looks very monochromatic, but then you have this beautiful blue light that's kind of, I guess that's the subject of the photo. The lady on the left isn't that interesting,
No.
though it gives an element of human life in the image. But the subject's really this: you've got the traffic light, the light of the building, and it gives this blue hue to the photo. The color is the subject, if you like.
Yes, this is a building very near where I work. It's still being built, and but what was quite interesting about it was that they have got alternating coloured striped windows, a sort of a an orangey window and a sort of a greeny window, and I walk past this every morning and sometimes lunchtime and evening, and depending on the angle of the light at the particular time that I walk past and the time of the year, the shadows or the reflection of that light with the sun shining onto it um, changes position quite radically, and I, I've just found myself a little bit fascinated, firstly by the colourfulness of the light reflection, and you know, it's the way it creates that lined effect. I, I, I quite like the effect of stripes. I find they're quite dramatic. They draw you they draw you into the photo. When I sort of find a scene like this, I sort of like to get myself in a position where I can bring out those lines and those colours as much as I can. One thing that I find gives an interesting quality to the light is if you have the sun shining into the window and then you shoot into the sun shining into the window, it is less intense than than the light shining directly into the lens. It takes quite a bit off the exposure, but it still is bright enough to bring, if you expose for the light to some extent, to kind of bring out a sort of a richness in the colours, and that's kind of one of the things I'm sort of thinking about when I see a scene like that.
Now, I've just chosen this photo more because it's a personal favorite of mine, and it reminded me a lot of something I read by Eric Kim, who was into experimenting through a transparent umbrella. And again, you've got a similar look as to your other photos. It's still fairly monochromatic, and strong lines.
Yes, I mean, this is the Millennium Bridge in London. It's a footbridge near St Paul's and the Tate Modern. A lot of my focus on light during the days is in bright sunlight and daytime, but here at nighttime, there's just as much light to play on, because you get the high contrast of illuminated light against the darkness of the nighttime scenes. So that's partly what attracts me to it. But I also kind of consider it a little bit in the theme of shooting through glass and dealing with scenes where you're working with a slightly opaque surface, shooting through a slightly opaque surface, like we saw in that first shot of the chef in the Chinese restaurant.
And again, it makes me think, what is the subject of this photo? Because I mean, you've timed your photo well. The guy is mid step, so that makes kind of an effective triangle there. But again, the person, it's not the person that's in focus, as you said, right? The cameras, or you have chosen to focus on the drops of water, and there's
Mm,
nice kind of, the drops of water kind of go down his arm here and almost round his hand. So when you look
mm.
at it, they're possibly not intended, but there's definitely a link between the drops of water and the guy here. It's but again, I think maybe the light itself is the subject of this photo, not so much the person, although the person does add to the image.
A strand of what I've been looking at is sort of trying to find scenes where I like the setting, and so then my focus is a little bit more on the setting than on the person. I would love to find situations where I've got a really interesting character and a really doing something very intriguing, and that's really a question of how patient you are to sort of stay in a scene and work it until you kind of get those magical combinations coming together.
This photo intrigued me. I'm guessing it's a reflection because uh, I I haven't known you to have done a double exposure before, but I'm not certain. It's definitely got beautiful lines going through it. It's got this interplay of the two characters, and you've got a third character in the back, which compositionally makes up a triangle within, well, within all kinds of lines. Um,
Yes.
tell me
Yeah.
about this photo.
So this was a photo done probably early 2016, I think. So about 4 years ago. And it was at a time when I was sort of actually set an exercise in a local photography group. And it was to choose a favorite street artist and see if you could do something in their style. A favorite street artist of mine was
Fan Ho?
Van Ho. That's it. And so what I noticed about Van Ho was that he did a series of photos which were double exposures, and that's what this one is. And another sort of theme of his was he often took shots of tram lines at a time of day when those tram lines kind of catch the light and really stand out from the street. So I was trying to capture a little bit of that. You can see that these tram lines are reasonably illuminated, and so you have a kind of a scene at the, the bottom corner of the picture where you see the tram lines curving around in one direction, and then there is a scene at the top where the tram lines are curving around into the top of the scene. Um, and I just you have the ability of taking a shot, and you see the shot on the back of your screen, and then you can use that shot to line up with the scene that you want to take as a next shot. And so I think what I like reasonably well is how the curve in the bottom sort of more or less lines up with a shadow going across the sort of the upper 2/3 of the image. Um, so they're quite hard to do to make them look reasonably pleasing. to my eyes now, looking back at that, I would probably like to see a little bit more contrast in the scene. But um, I, I I still do quite like the shot overall.
Here is, I don't know if there's a lot more to say about this, but it's obviously a great uh, so a great thing you spotted. You've got this wonderful interplay between a blue hair rollers and a blue watch, contrasting with the red roses on a, dressing gown. Brilliant moment.
Yes, yes, it's more of a moment. Somebody who I was waiting to be picked up somewhere, and this is in the town of Lewes in Sussex, and this lady was a person who worked in a hairdresser's, and she had just come out to make a phone call in her curlers, and you just, for me, in the part of the world that I'm in, you just really don't see people walking around in their curlers so much. I think maybe 50 years ago you might do. And I was talking to somebody in the group about how where they lived, which was Vietnam, they see a lot of that happening. So it doesn't vary from where you are. But for me, it was an unusual sight. And when I saw them, I was just not close enough to take the shot. So I just, uh, crossed the road as discreetly as I could and walked past her and quickly took a shot as I walked past. And yes, I just kind of liked it for that uniqueness. The colors in that sense were just the luck of how she chose to um, uh, uh, choose the rollers and what she happened to be wearing. So
And you've
uh,
even got this blue line here on the pavement that's kind of coming straight down to her watch.
yes,
This is
yes,
one of those moments where everything obviously just came together, and
that's
it
right.
this looks like the kind of photo you would have probably taken and walked off. And I'm guessing she didn't even know that you took a photo. I started to see a pattern in that as I was looking through your photos, and it comes into the way you will often have a person in your photo, but they're tucked up into the top right hand or the top left hand of your image. And your image again is all about the interplay of light um, in front of the person. And I guess I can see uh, progression in your photo. In the earlier photo, you had some people here, but now not only are you playing with this light here, and incidentally you got this beautiful contrast between the mottled light from what I guess is a tree to
Yeah,
the kind of harsh lines of a building. You got the guy's shadow, and you've got this leading line coming into the guy. And again, it's about timing. You've got the guy stepping out mid-step, and I think, and I said to you earlier when I looked over your photos of the last 2 years, I can see growth in you as a photographer. I can see how your photos have improved, and you have built upon each kind of stage that you've been focusing on. And this is kind of where I see your photography at the moment. Whenever I see beautiful lighting, someone in the corner, I know it's your photo.
yes, I could say that this type of photo is something that I've been working at over the last couple of years. I went on a street photography course with Damien DeMolder. He made great use and emphasis of light in some of his street photographs, and so I kind of felt a couple of years ago I'd really like to sort of just work a little bit more concertedly at this area and just sort of see what I can uncover and learn by sort of focusing more on the light. one of the key things is sort of how quite often, almost at any time of day in London, with relatively tall buildings with lots of glass in them, but when the sun shines on them, you get reflections happening in the glass, and they can create all sorts of patterns in the surroundings. Here you have light uh, coming into the scene there from the top right, reflecting on the window and creating this sort of horizontal streak of light through the scene. But then there is light from trees. There's a certain crisscrossing of shadow and light, and it created quite a rich scene of light and shadow to me. And so I'm often looking at the patterns of light that you see in these sorts of scenes with uh, where there are tall buildings around.
And I'm going to carry on flicking through some other photos again here. Similar this time, the person's center frame.
Yes.
Um, I don't know if that works as well as the corner, but again, here you've got the light coming in, that beautiful light.
Yes, there is a sort of a bit of a red tinge to this one, and I've revisited that place. Not quite sure where that redness came from. I think there must be some red light shining in from somewhere. But that helped bring a bit more color into the scene.
And another one, this time strong interplay of lines. And I think around this time, I started to wonder about your cropping, which I've mentioned before. I know that there are, again, some street photographers that will be adamant that thou shalt not crop. And also a lot of your photos, there's this one which has that strong interplay of light, and I think, and here, I think this is very a classic photo of yours, and you can definitely see the Fan Ho influence here. But when I saw this, this is when I really recognized, okay, this is becoming a pattern here. You got the person in the corner, you got the strong light. You can see the Fan Ho influence, but I also started to notice how many of your photos were shot in portrait mode.
Yeah.
Can you let me know your decision? What influences you? Whether to shoot landscape, portrait? Is it gear? Is it artistic intent? Do you crop?
In general, my approach to cropping, as I think is generally felt throughout the street photographers community, is that one should try and frame your shot as well as you can, and bar some basic alignment issues, aim to present the shot as you shot it. And obviously, if you can fill the frame with your shot, and you don't have to crop anything out of it, then you're just getting a better quality shot, the best quality shot you can out of the scene that you've taken. Now both this shot and the last shot were taken with my normal camera. So I would have chosen to go portrait with this particular scene, just because the shadows were a fairly narrow feature of the scene. I'm sitting here in an upper level, looking down at shadows coming into the scene, and that shadow scene is just all expressed in better caught in portrait mode.
Okay, I think we've got a few things culminating here that makes this photo work. I know there was an earlier photo very similar to this where you have the building, the beautiful shadows coming up, and you had the back of a person. Here you've got the front of a person showing some. She's obviously quite dynamic. She's walking. She's moving. I'm guessing you would have used a fairly fast shutter speed to freeze the motion. Again, it looks like quite a mature photo. Over to you.
Yes, I think it was taken about a year ago, and I was really very fascinated by all of these illuminated reflections and how they create patterns in the scene. So we have this quality of the sun shining on this yellow building and then creating this very regular patterns of light on the paving. But it was also something I was thinking about, that sometimes with those scenes, if I'm looking at the paving and not so much at the buildings, and even if I'm just looking at the buildings, they're often not very interesting colors, but I just happen to walk past these places on the route to work, and there was a set of very colorful buildings just here, and the combination of the light and the color creates for quite a dramatic scene, which I really liked. And then it's a question of sort of sitting there and waiting. This is a shot with a mobile phone, and I would have used a bit of exposure compensation just to deal with shooting into the light reflected off the building, and so it makes the character in the foreground a little bit darker. I've probably brought her up a little bit to help you see her a bit. But yes, this is really taking the opportunity to sort of make use of a bit of color when you do happen to come across it.
And do you edit your photos on your phone or import them onto your computer? A lot of street photographers use Snapseed.
Yes, I use Snapseed quite a lot. What I find I do is most of the photos that I take, I will bring into my computer at home and edit them in Lightroom and then export them. Sometimes I will sort of look at them on the phone first before posting. Phones which are posted through the phone are viewed through the phone. And so if I find that they don't quite translate so well, how they come out of Lightroom, I might sort of tweak them in Snapseed before posting them.
So here, very, very strong shadows. And this is quite an interesting character, this guy. And again, I'm only noticing it now, how you in most of the photos of yours I like always have people mid-step. So timing is obviously something you think about when you're framing a shot and you're taking a shot.
Yes, I do very much like paying attention and trying to capture the stride. If, say, my emphasis is on the shadows or the scene or the shape of the scene, and there are kind of two parts of that stride that I quite like. There's this part where he's got his front foot lifted up, just about to put it down. And then there is another part where the rear foot lifts up, and the heel and the foot can almost be vertical as it's being lifted up. And those two are my favorite parts of the foot, the sort of stride movement. But there are all sorts of shapes that people make, and you can capture them, and you can find that they bring something to the scene that you like and you might want to feature.
And here, this next photo, not so much a play of light, but a play on shape. And you don't see the person straight away, but you've just got this character in the bottom right, which gives this whole photo a sense of scale. And again, this is something I notice about you a lot, is your photos. You develop a style, and there'll be something you jump back to. And I remember a time about a year ago where a lot of your photos were all about shape, and you've obviously spotted this shape, and you framed it beautifully.
Yes, I will admit that I was on a workshop, and so the emphasis of that workshop was very much being taken around to different sites by this photographer, and he had a very good eye for shape, and that was one of the things I learnt a great deal from during that workshop, about how to look for shapes. I was in another scene in the Tate Modern and he sort of pointed out a view as we were walking down stairs of how the shapes of the staircase and the scene behind in the background made the figure of 5, and there are exercises that you can do to sort of help try and perceive different shapes that appear like something else, and I think that's a fascinating skill to develop in your kind of vision, to help make these sort of mental associations. I say it's something that I'm still very much learning about, and would like to make use of more. And it brings a kind of a sense of abstractness and minimalism to your scenes when you can sort of bring out some of those shapes and patterns in your scenes.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I think this is the first of what will hopefully be a series with the street photographers community with SPC.
We've got a lot of great photographers in the group that that you should have many very interesting conversations with.
Well, what I love is the fact that you are a fairly accomplished photographer. You're a very strong photographer, but also very humble, and learning is obviously still something you are very, very aware of, and your own learning journey. And I'm often a little bit skeptical of people who think they know it all. Maybe a last. What would your advice be on learning street photography?
Well, for me, I have taken the approach that it's just been it's a very dynamic and a very compelling area to shoot in. It's also, there are a lot of challenges. It's very random. You have to be very patient. You have to practice a lot, and and it is something that you have to work at to bring something from it. I've always gone on quite a few workshops each year with street photographers that I can get on workshops for that I admire, and so that's always brought new and fresh ideas and new ways of looking. Street photography conferences where you can get to them if they're being held in your part of the world, and there are quite a few that go on all of the time. They're really great sources of inspiration because they often have a lot of photographers coming to do detailed talks, and just to let that sort of wash over you and flow over you, you come away and you think, yes, I'd like to try that. And one time as I was saying, I'd like to I wanted to work at light, and that's really helped me bring my photography forward. So I kind of think of photography as a great sort of hobby that you can just continue to do and never have to give up.
So conferences, learn from others, and of course, uh, people can always join SPC, our MeWe group. I'll leave some links down there somewhere. So
Yes.
thank you, Angelo. That's been absolutely fascinating hearing a little bit about what makes you tick and your uh, the decisions you make when you're taking and editing photos.